the dark blue angles and crosshatches of his clan tattoos that covered his cheeks and the bridge of his nose. After 30 years and more plying the spaceways, his least favorite load was politicians. Lucky for him, a full, in-person council meeting was a rare event. Pinckney, a heavyset man whose dark green and yellow facial tattoos vanished into the rolls of fat under his swarthy chin, made a sound of outrage at his suggestion. "We have not been introduced to the board yet," he said. "Our views cannot be noted until we are presented in person and been welcomed by the host delegation." "Dunno why," Iltekinov muttered to himself. "Waste of time. Traders don't bother with face-to-face. Entertainers don't bother with face-to-face. Law enforcement don't bother with face-to-face." Pinckney overheard him. "We will do these things properly, as our governments have done them for 200 years, Captain," he said stiffly. "Representational and in the proper order. We will have to speed review all of the minutes taken thus far so we don't delay the others any more than we already have." Iltekinov yawned. Once again, Pinckney was trying to blame him for their tardiness. The captain shut out the criticism. He had warned them, when they'd first contacted him for passage to Portent Star, that space travel wasn't like running a light rail system in a city. It had been too much to assume that the politicians would pay the least attention to what he'd said, let alone retain it. He was a good Yolkovian, and he had been willing to carry the negotiators to this very important conference on Dree for no other fee than fuel replenishment, in spite of the trips interrupting his usual rounds through the cluster. Worse yet, the diplomat's luggage, for 5 human beings intended to spend less than a month in a location where food, shelter, entertainment, and, if necessary, toiletries and clothing would be provided, took up almost a third of his cargo bay, making him leave behind that much of his payload on Yoke 5, also called Cetria, the home planet in the system. The counselors could have made up for it by being pleasant, but no. They went on and on about how an ion storm prevented him from picking them up on the day that he had promised, as if they knew anything at all about the rigors of astrogation, or physics, for that matter. How in all of nature did the 5 biggest complainers in the galaxy end up being named as representatives for the entire system of Yoke? He grumbled to himself, and started to turn back. The lone Weechu on the council, Ferrat Erminok, looked up from her screen and tipped him a sheepish grin and a wink of one of her big round eyes. The non-humanoid, with the thick, black-tipped white fur, was the only one who picked up on what he was thinking. He grinned back at her and settled down in his seat. A side screen on his personal console ran what they were seeing. The Yolkovian contingent was receiving the minutes of an extended meeting of the Advisory Council of the cluster system. He had his screen muted so the transcribed text ran along the top of the image, instead of playing audio into the implant in the portion of skull over his left ear. While the combined vid featured visuals, graphics, and historical videos in an attempt to liven it up, the content of each learned and lengthy discourse was such boring stuff he wouldn't bother to listen to it even if he was on a 50-year sublight haul all the way to the core worlds of the Imperium, or the center of the trade union, and had lost his entire collection of action shows and pornography in a database crash, and everyone in the ship he might play basketball with was in a coma, and hidden somewhere in the press of information was the directions to a planetoid full of cut jewels and wanton, willing women. The download wasn't even good for inducing sleep, since every so often one of the delegates would break into a screaming diatribe, probably out of frustration that he couldn't strangle all the others. The Yolkovians ought to feel grateful that they had the rapid data transmission system at their disposal. True, it wasn't as satisfying as being in the room with your conversation partner, but it was a fast conveyance of information. The system had become vital during the founding of an interstellar community, and evolved greatly over the course of history as that community had evolved. The distance between 2 planets once meant a 9-hour gap in between sentences. Digital high dispersal transmission had shortened that to 9 minutes.